Well, a woman found hanging from a tree behind a Jackson house has been identified, and that case is raising new questions tonight.
That's right. A city councilman says that federal authorities need to step in. 16 WAPT's Ross Adams explains what he wants and why he says the community can't wait.
Councilman Kenneth Stokes says he just sent a letter to the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of Mississippi asking for the agency to help in any way it can after a young woman was found hanging from a tree in an abandoned home in West Jackson.
A makeshift memorial near the exact spot where police found the body of Tasia Fortune hanging from a tree in the backyard of a vacant house. Someone placed a photo of Fortune under a tree. It shows the 29-year-old mother of four with her hand on one side of her face. The framed picture is surrounded by a lot of bright balloons, flowers, and teddy bears. We don't know who placed the items there. Fortune's family is from Kentucky, and they made their way to the city over the weekend.
It's just after 9 at night in Jackson, Mississippi. A neighbor walks past a vacant house on Road of Remembrance, a street name that, by morning, will feel almost too fitting. Something in the backyard catches their eye. Up in the branches of a tree, barely visible in the dark, is the body of a woman. Police arrive, then the fire department, then something no one expects, a ladder truck, the kind used for house fires and rescues, rolled in just to bring her down. She was that high up. Investigators will later estimate she'd been there for 3, maybe 4 days. Nobody knew. Nobody reported her missing. And once her name is released, one question will follow her family everywhere they go. How does a woman end up that high in a tree, and why? Her name was Tasia Fortune. She was 29 years old, a mother of 4, and her family doesn't believe for 1 second that she put herself there.
We're going to press this as far as we can press it until she gets justice.
Tasia loved living life. Like, there's no way that she took her own life.
This is her story and the investigation that's now pulling in a city councilman, a U.S. attorney's office, and a community demanding answers.
Kenneth Stokes says he just sent a letter to the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of Mississippi asking for the agency to help in any way it can after a young woman was found hanging from a tree in an abandoned home in West Jackson.
Anything that they can provide to get this hanging case solved quickly. We need to have someone in handcuffs as soon as yesterday. And I don't care where you go to the grocery store to get something to eat, people talking about that hanging. Once upon a time, a press release will have come out quickly because of the sensitive nature of hangings in Mississippi.
Welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, this is the place for real true crime cases. Hit like, drop a comment, and subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. Now let's get into what actually happened to Tasia Fortune. To understand how Jackson found itself here, we have to go back a little further than that Monday night. Back to July 26th, the last time Tasia's mother, Christy Spivey, laid eyes on her daughter. Tasia wasn't a stranger to travel. Her sister, Latoni, later explained that Tasia moved regularly between 2 states, Mississippi, where she'd built a life for over a decade, and Kentucky, where extended family still gathered. That July, she'd made the trip north for something joyful, a family reunion, faces she loved, a break from routine. Nothing, according to those closest to her, seemed unusual. Nothing hinted at what was coming. And then silence. No calls raising alarm. No missing persons report making the rounds. For days, Tasia simply wasn't where anyone expected her to be, and yet no one around her sensed danger. That gap between the last confirmed sighting and the moment she was found is where this case begins to unravel. Pause for a second and think about that. 4 days can pass completely unnoticed before a tragedy comes to light. If you're new to these cases, you already know that silence is almost always where the real story hides. Monday, August 3rd. Evening settles over a quiet residential block called Road of Remembrance. The house behind which she'd be discovered wasn't occupied, vacant, overgrown, easy to overlook. It's the kind of property most residents walk past without a second glance. But that night, someone didn't just walk past. A neighbor spotted something wrong. High in a tree, obscured by branches and failing light, was a human form. Whoever made that discovery did what any of us would hope to do. They called it in immediately, alerting Jackson police at 9. 5 p.m. officers responded and confirmed the unthinkable. A deceased woman, unidentified at the time, suspended in the tree behind that empty home. What happened next is part of why this case exploded across social media and local news within days. Removing her required more than officers on foot. Firefighters were called to the scene, and they didn't bring a standard rescue kit. They brought a ladder truck, the kind normally reserved for multi-story blazes, for reaching heights human hands and standard equipment simply can't manage. Think about the height that requires. That single detail, a fire truck ladder needed just to bring a body down from a backyard tree, is what transformed a quiet neighborhood tragedy into a citywide conversation almost overnight. Investigators examining the scene formed an early theory that would only deepen the unease already spreading through the community. Based on the condition of the body, they believe she had likely been there for 3 to 4 days already. Which means, somewhere in that stretch of ordinary Jackson evenings, people going to work, running errands, living their lives just streets away, a woman was hanging, undiscovered, behind an abandoned property. Sit with that for a moment before we move forward. Somebody drove past that block, maybe more than once during those days, and still, nothing looked out of place enough to stop them. The Hinds County Coroner's Office took custody of the case. Coroner Jeremiah Howard confirmed publicly that the woman's remains had been transferred to the Mississippi State Medical Examiner's Office.
It's confirmed that the woman's body was sent to the State Medical Examiner's Office. We're live outside of JPD. I'm Nicholas Brooks, 16 WAPT News.
Where forensic pathologists would begin the process of answering the 2 questions everyone wanted resolved. How did she die? And just as critically, why? Howard also confirmed something else, something that shifted this from an anonymous mystery into a deeply personal loss. The family had been notified. Somewhere a mother, a sister, 4 children were receiving news no family should ever have to hear. It would take until Thursday, 3 days after that fire truck ladder pulled her from the branches, for the coroner's office to release her name to the public. 29-year-old Tasia Fortune, a name that within hours would be attached to a growing chorus of a city and eventually federal authorities, demanding to know exactly what happened to her. Thursday, August 6th. 3 days after the discovery, the Hinds County Coroner's Office finally confirmed what many in the neighborhood had already begun whispering.
It was heartbreaking. One, because they said she was found in a backyard, not alive. And God didn't put us here to be done that way.
Violet Wilson says learning the woman was found hung from a tree made the discovery even more disturbing.
It's unnatural in this lifetime. You don't see things like that.
Darren Johnson says this has shaken a neighborhood he considered safe.
It's quiet, older people over here, so we don't normally have that. So just to hear that happen, it kind of got us shook, basically the whole neighborhood shook, because we never have that problem.
Now, he says, some neighbors are questioning whether they should stay.
I'm gonna be honest with you, it kind of had me in a whole nother stage where, like, man, should we still stay here or should we leave?
A name, a face, an identity attached to the woman pulled from that tree. Tasia Fortune, 29, and as the world would soon learn, so much more than a headline. Those who loved her described a woman full of contradictions that somehow made sense together, strong-minded yet warm, fierce yet tender-hearted, a vibrant presence in every room she entered. Above all, she was a mother. 4 children who now have to grow up without her. If you're a parent watching this, imagine for a second the phone call her mother received. Not an update, not reassurance. The kind of news that reshapes every day that follows it. Christy Spivey, Tasia's mother, sat down with ABC News in the days after, and what she said cut straight through any lingering assumption that this might be a simple, tragic case of self-harm. She did not do this to herself, Spivey told the outlet, her certainty unwavering. I know my daughter. It wasn't a mother refusing to accept grief. It was a mother refusing to accept a narrative that, in her eyes, didn't match the person she raised. Spivey painted a picture of someone stable, present, loving. A woman who, just days before her death, had been surrounded by relatives at a reunion in Kentucky. Nothing about her behavior raising concern. Tasia Fortune, Tasia's sister, echoed that same disbelief in an interview with Mississippi Today. She spoke of Tasia's constant back and forth between Mississippi and Kentucky, not as someone running from something, but as someone chasing connection, family, belonging. Tasia's message was simple. The family isn't looking for closure through assumption. They're searching for facts. Here's a question worth sitting with as this unfolds. How often do the people closest to a victim get dismissed too quickly, before investigators even finish their work? That frustration, the space between what a family believes and what authorities are willing to confirm, didn't stay contained to living rooms and interviews. It spilled directly into City Hall. Enter Ward 3 Councilman Kenneth Stokes, a figure known throughout Jackson for speaking bluntly and refusing to let uncomfortable cases fade quietly from public attention. Within days of Fortune's identification, Stokes wasn't just commenting from the sidelines. He was actively pushing the case upward, toward federal eyes. He drafted and sent a formal letter to Mississippi's U.S. Attorney, requesting federal assistance with the investigation. In that letter, Stokes didn't hedge his language. He referred to Fortune outright as a murder victim, a characterization far more direct than anything local police had offered publicly. Speaking with 16 WAPT News, Stokes described the atmosphere rippling through the city. Everywhere you go, people are talking about that hanging. It wasn't confined to one neighborhood or one online thread. It had become a citywide conversation, fueled by grief, suspicion, and a demand for transparency. He publicly questioned how a woman's body ended up positioned high enough in a tree that firefighters needed specialized equipment, typically reserved for structural rescues, just to bring her down. For Stokes, that logistical detail wasn't a footnote. It was a red flag demanding scrutiny. Ask yourself this: does a detail like that, on its own, prove foul play? Or does it simply demand that investigators rule everything out before settling on an answer? That distinction matters, and it's exactly what the coming weeks were meant to determine. Meanwhile, Jackson police remained notably guarded. When Mississippi Today requested access to the incident report, police spokesperson Tommy Brown declined, citing the investigation's active status. No additional details, no timeline for release, just confirmation that the case remained open and, for now, largely sealed from public view. Between a grieving family convinced of murder, a councilman escalating the case to federal authorities, and a police department offering almost nothing beyond silence, Jackson found itself suspended in the same uncertainty as the case itself, waiting for the medical examiner's office to deliver the one thing that might finally settle the growing unrest. A cause of death. To fully grasp why Tasia Fortune's death spread the way it did far beyond Jackson, into national headlines and federal inboxes, you have to understand something uncomfortable. This wasn't an isolated incident in Mississippi's recent memory. It was the third. Less than a year before Fortune was found, 2 other hanging deaths had already shaken communities across the state, each carrying its own weight of controversy. The first involved Trey Reed, a 21-year-old black student at Delta State University in Cleveland, Mississippi. His death, ruled a suicide by local police, sparked immediate pushback from his family. An independent examination conducted separately reached similar conclusions to the initial autopsy, no evidence pointing toward foul play. Still, that official determination didn't quiet the doubt. Reed's relatives, along with their legal representation, pushed publicly for security footage to be released, refusing to simply accept a verdict without transparency behind it. The second case belonged to Corey Zuccotti, an unhoused man in his 30s found in Vicksburg. Authorities investigating his death also concluded suicide, backed by findings from the state's medical examiner. Here's where I want you to pause and think critically for a moment. Two separate rulings, two separate investigations, both landing on the same tragic conclusion. And yet, when a third hanging death surfaces in the same state within the same year, communities don't respond with acceptance. They respond with alarm. Why do you think that is? Layer onto that a name mentioned earlier, Nolan Xavier Wells, 18 years old, whose case had already ignited fierce debate over how Mississippi law enforcement handles death investigations involving black residents. Given the state's long, painful history with racial violence, a history that includes actual lynchings carried out under the guise of justice, any death involving a rope, a tree, and a black victim inevitably reopens wounds far older than the individual case itself. That's the backdrop against which Tasia Fortune's death landed, not as a standalone tragedy, but as one more entry in a troubling sequence, enough to make an entire community stop trusting easy explanations before all the facts arrive. So where does the investigation actually stand right now? At this stage, official answers remain limited. Coroner Jeremiah Howard confirmed Fortune's body was sent to the Mississippi State Medical Examiner's office, where forensic pathologists are working through the process required to determine both cause and manner of death, distinctions that matter enormously. Cause explains the physical mechanism. Manner classifies intent, accident, suicide, homicide, or undetermined. Until that ruling arrives, every theory, including Stokes' murder characterization, remains just that. A theory Jackson police have offered little beyond confirming the investigation stays active. Spokesperson Tommy Brown's refusal to release an incident report leaves outside observers, including journalists and grieving relatives, working with fragments rather than a full picture. If you were building this timeline yourself, piece by piece, what would you want investigators to release first? The autopsy findings, or whatever surveillance footage might exist from that vacant property. Meanwhile, Councilman Stokes' letter to the U.S. Attorney's Office sits with federal authorities, a request that, if honored, could bring additional investigative resources and independent oversight to a case increasingly viewed through a lens of public distrust. For Tasia's family, none of this changes their conviction. A mother who insists her daughter would never have taken her own life. A sister recounting a woman who traveled between two states not to escape, but to stay close to the people she loved. 4 children who, whatever the medical examiner ultimately determines, have already lost their mother. What remains is a city holding its breath, a family refusing silence, and an investigation that, whichever direction it concludes, will inevitably be measured against everything that came before it. As of now, no cause or manner of death has been publicly confirmed. This case remains active, and we'll continue following it closely. If this story affected you the way it did us, let us know down in the comments and stay subscribed, because the moment new developments emerge, we'll be the first to break it down for you.